I'm Maria LaRose, and on behalf of the Dalai Lama Center, I'm very happy to welcome all of you tonight. You'll be seeing a lot of me in a few minutes because I have the greatest privilege of sitting in this seat with Dan Siegel in just a little bit. But before we get started, I just want to introduce to you Victor Chan, who many of you know, I'm sure. Victor is the founding director of the Dalai Lama Center, so please welcome Victor.
Thank you, Maria. Some years ago, the Dalai Lama told me a story, and I would like to tell you this story as well. He told a story to me, but it's a story that he also have since told many, many people. So I think it was 2 or 3 weeks ago when he was in Ireland, he told the story to many Irish people there. He has a friend, a very good friend, when he was in Tibet, and this friend is a monk in his monastery. And when the Dalai Lama left Tibet, the monk was put into prison. And he was in prison for 18 years. And then eventually he was freed, and he came to Dharamsala in India to see the Dalai Lama. So they sat down and they talked, and the monk was telling the Dalai Lama his experience of 18 years in prison. The Dalai Lama asked him whether he was at some point being afraid during all this time when he was in prison. And the monk said, "Yes, Your Holiness, I was actually afraid several times during those 18 years. And the Dalai Lama said, "Yes, so you are quite afraid you will be killed or you will be tortured or something like that?" And the monk said, "No, I was afraid several times because I was afraid that I would lose compassion for the people who kept me in prison." So the Dalai Lama found this a very spectacular way of having a mental discipline and having the ability to have empathy and compassion for the people who did bad things to this monk. So the Dalai Lama was very fond of telling this story. And the fact that because the monk had a mental training discipline, that through mind control, he was able to maintain equilibrium in his mind. So he did not go crazy because he was meditating every day. And above all, he was able to achieve a degree of transcendence, even in such a difficult time. And then the Dalai Lama told me that now the monk is 93 years old. So in addition to him having a tremendous well-being mentally, he also has tremendous well-being physically as well. He's 93, maybe 94 now. So this is the kind of work that Dan Siegel is doing. He is integrating a lot of great disciplines like education, psychiatry, medicine, Eastern wisdom tradition, contemplation, neuroscience. He's integrating all these disciplines in order to look for ways that all of us can improve our mental and physical well-being. So I look upon Dan as a kind of a modern-day Renaissance man. he's able to take all these findings, all the data, all the most interesting research, and then bring it to the masses, and also to bring it to a level where it could be implemented and be of use to people. So that's Dan Siegel. He got his start by going to med school at Harvard. And then halfway through med school, he decided he wanted to drop out. He wanted to be a fisherman. And then he got quite discouraged by that idea because he understood that to be a fisherman, he has to get up at 3 a.m. in the morning. So he trashed that idea. He continued with Harvard, got his degree, and now he's at UCLA as a professor in psychiatry, I believe. I first met Dan some years ago in Denver. And he was hosting a Steven Spielberg from Hollywood and his wife for lunch. And he was very kind and generous, and he sat me next to Steven Spielberg's wife, the beautiful actress Kate. So that was how I first met Dan. And since then, we had Dan coming to Vancouver a number of times. And in 2009, he was on stage with the Dalai Lama talking about creativity and well-being together with the founders of the Blue Man Group and people like Eckhart Tolle and Sir Ken Robinson. So Dan is no stranger to Vancouver. As a matter of fact, he first came here, I think, during Vancouver Expo in '87. And he's also the only person I know who, some years ago, got an email from the office of the Pope asking Dan to go to the Vatican so that he could instruct Pope John Paul in attachment theory. So he's quite a guy, and we love him, and we are so happy that he's here to give us some of the latest work that he's doing. Dan Siegel.
Have a seat.
Thank you.
Did you really do that?
No. Victor tells good stories. Thank you, Victor.
As a girl born and raised Catholic, that's impressive that the Pope phoned you, emailed you. Here's your water.
You learn when you get an email from .god, you don't turn it down.
Okay, so now I have my cell phone, but you need to know I'm not waiting for a call. It's kind of my timer. So when I do this, it's not me being bored of what you're saying. It's me saying, I wonder what
do you want my watch?
It is out there. Yeah, that'd be better.
This is an old device that you used to have.
It doesn't have the numbers going by.
No. It goes around.
Has a big hand and a little hand. Yeah, I think I can understand.
We also shared dinner, so we're sharing a lot of things.
Thank you. So Dan and I were wondering, before we start chatting, we're going to have a conversation up here. Hopefully you will enjoy that. And then at some point in a little while, we'll open up the floor to you to ask any questions that you have. I'm sure that you'll have plenty. But we're wondering which hat you're wearing as you're here tonight. I think we're all here as human beings who are interested in learning what you have to tell us in terms of all of our relationships in life. But we're wondering about how many of you are here tonight primarily with your parent hat on, for example. Wondering about being could you just turn the lights up just a little bit so we can get a sense? Great. And super, did you see that? Mm-hmm. And educators, people who are teachers, administrators. Great. Mental health workers, counselors, healthcare workers, nurses, doctors, practitioners. Have I missed anything?
Other groups? Lots of others.
And others, good. Okay. So that's good to know, because people will, as Dan's answering the questions, he'll be thinking about all of you. So before, again, we start talking specifically about mindset, you can dim the lights now, too. Okay. It's much more romantic that way.
Dinner.
You give me a jewelry, and now the lights are down.
And we're alone.
And it's being recorded.
This is Hollywood.
Not good, not good. Victor mentioned that you left university at some point. You started to be a doctor, and then you walked away from that. And I think it's kind of significant that there was a reason for that. And it is the backdrop, really, for the work that you've done. Tells us something about you.
Yeah, you know, the background on what happened there was I chose medical school because I thought there'd be a wonderful way to blend understanding science and reality through the lens of medical science, but also embracing the importance of subjectivity and the importance of feelings and memories and things like that. So when I got to medical school, it was so not like that. I think I naively thought it was going to be like that, that I just felt pounded into the ground in the socialization process. So ultimately, I just was really despairing and decided I would drop out of school.
So what did that look like? Do you mean that you were concerned about an aspect of the patients you were dealing with, the people you were dealing with, that wasn't valued?
Yeah, I mean, just to back up just a bit, you know, when I was in college, I was a biochemistry major during the day. So we were looking actually for the enzyme that allowed salmon to go from fresh water to salt water.
That would be the salmon connection.
There's the salmon connection, yeah, for becoming a salmon fisherman. So at night I was working on the suicide prevention service on the phone and was being taught how the way we communicate with each other can make the difference between the way someone would decide to live or someone would die. And I always felt in those early years of my education that the objective findings of a salmon having an enzyme that could change the concentration in their plasma so they could survive in the sea had to be similar to what the communication was between people that would allow them to survive in the sea of a modern city life, you know. So I was always searching for that blend between subjectivity in terms of our inner experience and objectivity, like the enzyme. So I came to medical school really honoring both, but my professors, for example, you know, if someone, let's say, got a terrible diagnosis, they might walk in the patient's room with us trailing behind as the young duckling medical students, and they would say, you know, I have something to tell you. Your tests really reveal that you have cancer and you probably have about 2 months to live, and I'm sorry to tell you. And then they'd walk out. And we would be like shocked, like in this kind of emotional whiplash. And this would happen not just watching them, but when we would sometimes, like, or if I met a patient and said, you know, this person is struggling with, you know, depression about the illness they have where their bones are dissolving like sponges, and it's really, really upsetting to them. And I'm trying to find a way to have them have meaning in their life. My supervising physician would say, you know, you shouldn't be asking the patients how they feel or getting these stories of their lives. That's not for physicians to do. And this one teacher, I'll never forget this. This was the moment before I decided to drop out of school. He cocks his head to one side and he says, Daniel, he goes, is your father a psychiatrist? Like this.
Your face, you have to see his face. It's like, that's the worst thing you could possibly
do.
You
know, and my father is an engineer, and so I said, no, he's an engineer. And he cocks his head the other way. He goes, Daniel. I said, yeah. He goes, do you want to be a psychiatrist? and I had actually never thought about being a psychiatrist, believe it or not. I always wanted to be a pediatrician. And so I said no, and he said, this asking about feelings is not what doctors do. You know, if you want to do that, go become a social worker. So I got the application to go to social work school and all sorts of things, and ultimately just decided to go west.
And so
So I traveled across Canada. You know.
Oh, that's the salmon story.
Yeah, that's right.
So over the years, you kept that curiosity about combining the subjective with the objective. And I think when I read about Mindsight, I think Mindsight, for me at least, is a complex and complicated idea. So what we're going to do is look at that closely. But as a beginning of this conversation, will you tell me how you define Mindsight?
Sure. Well, the word Mindsight was created inside of me as a life preserver, because when I decided to go back to school after not being a salmon fisherman here in British Columbia, I went and did a bunch of other things, but ultimately when I went back to school, I said to myself, the only way I'm going to survive is to have some way of realizing some of my teachers are like missing some kind of gear in their way their mind works, that they don't see the mind, so they don't have Mindsight, and I've got to find the professors who do have Mindsight. So it became this very important word in my mind that meant, how does a mind see the mind of someone else, or even of yourself? And in those days, this is back in 1980, really, 81, we didn't have another term for something like that. So the term has gotten a little more elaborate, and we can talk about that soon, but since that time, we now have other scientific concepts that are related to it, like theory of mind, reflective function, mind-mindedness, psychological mindedness, mentalization, and there are a bunch of research programs looking into that. But in those days, Mindsight for me was a word that I just kept privately in my head to always figure out if I should take on a person as a role model or not.
How does the mind see the mind? Is
Yeah.
that what you said?
Exactly.
What does that mean?
Exactly. What does that mean? What do you think, Maria? What does that mean to you?
Well, for me, it's more like how am I hearing my thoughts in a way? So it's so it's somewhere between thoughts and feelings. It's kind of a gray, mushy thing, this mind. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting you say it's a gray, mushy thing. In the Oxford Companion to the Mind, the most recent edition, you look up these definitions that people have, and the first way they describe mind in their little glossary thing is a vague term.
Yes, that's what it is.
So this is the big journey. You know, if you say the mind, seeing the mind, of course you have to stop and say, you know, what is the mind to begin with? That's actually seeing itself.
What is the mind?
You,
What is the mind?
You want to go right there?
Yeah.
Okay, this is like a fast date. You know, this can make you lose friends, so you have to be careful. This is a really funny season now, because just a week ago I was teaching in England at the Royal College of Physicians, and the oldest medical school in England, and I reached my 100,000 mental health professional number. So for the last 8 years, I've been asking people face to face in groups like this. I would ask, you know, how many, in this case, mental health professionals, how many of you have gotten even one lecture in your training as mental health professionals on what the mind is? And what percentage do you think, now it's been 100,000 is the number, how many do you think, what percentage of those 100,000 mental health professionals, this includes social workers, psychologists, psychiatrists, occupational therapists, nurses, the whole gamut of mental health professionals around the planet. What do you think it is?
How many have had a lecture on the
Even
mind?
one lecture on what the mind is, yeah.
Well, I guess.
Zero. Now, what makes you say zero?
Because they're mental health workers.
For me, it was zero. It's absolutely right. So
Wow.
it's about 2%. So the range
So
is about 2 to 5%.
why is the question important?
You know, the question's important for a bunch of reasons. For us as a population of human beings on this planet, it's important because the way we shape culture is by awakening the mind. And if we're going to survive as a species, we need to really understand deeply what the mind is so that we can actually intentionally shape cultural evolution. So one of the research centers I help run at UCLA is called the Center for Culture, Brain, and Development. And we're studying the ways societal practices shape synaptic connections. So if you can do that intentionally, wisely, you can think about how you would like our species to survive or not. So whether you're working climate change issues or educational programs or mental health issues or whatever, the mind is important for all those arenas of human experience. So that's one reason. For mental health, it's a really important thing because, believe it or not, our name is mental health practitioners, and yet in my training, I never had one lecture on what the mental was of mental health. Isn't that strange? And yet no one seemed to be bothered by it. So I started asking people, like, am I alone? And it turns out it's about 2% that ever got a lecture. And if you even ask that 2%, okay, what is the mind? They say it's your thoughts. And then I go, okay, that's great. What's a thought? And then they're stopped in their tracks. And so it becomes a really important question, because if you can define the mind, then you can take the next step and say what a healthy mind is. And then if you do that, then you can actually not have a field of mental health that's actually a field totally designed around mental disorder. Even to the point where in Scientific American Mind last year, there was a lead cover story saying, are you mentally healthy? And you look at the article, and it basically goes through the criteria of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual symptoms, and if you don't have enough of them, it says, oh, you don't have a disorder, therefore you're healthy, which is
no, that's true.
mindless.
So
So
if I'm a person, what I need to get a picture of is a person who has Mindsight and a person who does not have Mindsight. So because this heady conversation is interesting, but hopefully people can have Mindsight and not even be able to have this conversation, but they just have Mindsight.
Right,
so tell me what it looks like in your world when somebody encounters something and they have Mindsight. How might they react as opposed to when they don't?
Okay, so let's take you, for example. So you started out our talk here, you said we want to get to know who you are in the audience, because you want to know what their perspective would be. You were very interested in everybody's subjective experience and what their background was, so you and I could have a conversation where we would relate to them as best as possible. Even now, your question, it's clear you're thinking about the mental perspective of other people. So you've got it, Maria.
Oh, good. I was getting worried.
but it isn't like being pregnant. It's not all or nothing. There's degrees of it, and so, and you can turn it off or turn it on. This is the weird thing. Is Victor was mentioning about Steven Spielberg. I work for the Survivors of the Shoah Foundation, which Steven started, and in part of that work, I went to the concentration camps in Eastern Europe. And when I was working in Poland, I went to one of the camps, Medonek, near a town called Kazimierz Dolny. And the thing about that camp that was so painful, all the camps obviously were painful, but this one was literally right in the middle of the city. And the person touring me around was a person who had been a child during the war. And so I asked him about what it was like to be living in the city with the camp right there. And he said, you'd think that these guards were really mean people. He said, but they're really nice to their pets, and they were nice to their kids. And I realized then that you could have actually the capacity to see from your dog's perspective or see from your child's perspective, but turn it off. And we've learned subsequently that the actual circuits in the brain that allow you to actually not just have a mind, because everybody has a mind, but actually see that you have a mind or see that someone else has a mind, those can be turned off. And there are a number of studies, and we can go through the science if you want, but just to summarize them, when we're under threat, we start treating people who are not similar to us in a much more hostile way, and we literally shut off the Mindsight map-making circuits that allow me to say, I wonder what's going on in that person's mind. So you put a person in a gas chamber, or you're a part of genocide. So it isn't an all or nothing thing, and the conditions that we live in as human beings can create a situation where you turn it off like a switch.
Well,
and that's
we
a
have
serious
biases too, right? We're raised with cultural biases that
Absolutely.
say that person is an evil person, that person is a good person, and so
Right.
how is it that we're not able to have compassion for that person because we were told a story about them? So
Well, exactly. So, the story that Victor tells about the Dalai Lama and the monk, he says, I'm afraid I'm going to lose compassion. He's afraid his Mindsight circuitry will be shut off and he won't have compassion for his captors anymore. And when you well, we haven't defined the mind yet, but when you really start looking at that, it starts getting really, really interesting when you think about stories like that, or about the Holocaust or genocide in general. And the idea is then, this may be a heady thing, but the fact is it's really useful, because if you can start teaching Mindsight skills in schools, you can allow people to have a pathway in their life that isn't just what evolution made them have a propensity for. So when you say the word awakened mind, the phrase awakened mind, you're really talking about a way of allowing the mind to change the natural proclivities of the brain. And this is an incredible discovery in the last really few years. The science of it, I think we've known about it in general for a while, but the science is really clear. You can use the mind to change the brain. So if we've evolved as a species genetically, and then in a certain way, and then culturally, our culture has supported that, you can use awareness to actually change the route that we're on as a species. And all you have to do is look at the newspaper and realize that's the kind of awakening we desperately need.
Well, I was just going to ask you that, because I want you to describe this connection between the mind and the brain, because all of us are interested in, really, you're telling me that I can actually change my brain in a good way by my mind?
Yes.
But I know that part of what you talk about is mindfulness and meditation, and there was a time when that was considered just sort of a luxury. Once you have everything else, then you could take up a little transcendental meditation. But when I read what you're writing now, and I hear what you're saying now, I think you're more of the mind that, or I shouldn't say the word mind, you think.
I don't mind.
That this is more than a luxury at this point in our time in history. This idea of having Mindsight is essential. And I've even heard you say that you believe that there are people with damaged brains now who are walking around the street and have great jobs or living their lives, but that our brains are being damaged.
Yeah. Okay, so there's a lot of questions on the table.
Sorry.
Yes.
That's because I needed a glass of water.
Okay,
I needed a drink.
Throw in my court. So let's cover a couple things. So to just historically give you the background of this, when I went back to medical school, I started in pediatrics when I finished, and then went to psychiatry, and ultimately went to child psychiatry, and then went to research psychiatry. So I became a researcher in relationships between parents and their babies, attachment research. So at that time, it was the late 80s, and I was really interested in how you could understand how a healthy mind develops, even though I had no idea what a mind was. But I wanted to know how a healthy mind develops. So right around that time, it was the beginning of the decade of the brain. And I was made in charge of an educational program at UCLA, and I brought in about 40 scientists into a room, and I said, this is the beginning of the decade of the brain. Let's ask one question and see if we can come up with an answer. What's the connection between the mind and the brain? That was it. That was the question. The scientists were from anthropology, sociology, computer science, linguistics. There were people from various branches of psychology, neuroscience. There was a neurosurgeon in the room. I was a psychiatrist. A whole range, 40 scientists from the university. And what do you think we attempted to address first? Mind or brain? Brain. That was easy. That's a no-brainer, right?
That's a no-brainer.
Yeah. So, we know the brain is part of an extended nervous system that's distributed throughout the whole body, that there are cells called neurons, and that are in the numbers about 100 billion in the skull part of the brain. And then there's supportive cells that are in the trillions that do all sorts of things we don't really understand yet, but they seem to support the functioning of the neurons. And that these connections among the neurons are basically allowing an action potential, which is basically ions going in and out of this long membrane. So if I'm one neuron reaching out to you as the downstream neuron, down my long length, I'm going to have ions going in and out, so it's electrical flow. And at the end, I'm going to release a neurotransmitter, and that's going to go across this synapse. This is the first day, we can't touch it. So this is going across this synapse, right? And then the receptors on your membrane are going to receive, like a lock receives a key, it's going to receive the neurotransmitter. So that's chemical energy, and that's going to lead to an action potential down your long length. And that's basically how two neurons communicate to each other. And if you were an average neuron, Maria, though I'm sure your mom never wanted you to be average, but if you were average...
No, in those days, average was the good thing.
Oh, average was a good thing? Okay. So you would have how many connections to other neurons, do you think?
Hundreds and hundreds, I bet.
Yes, you would. 10,000.
Wow.
10,000.
Wow.
Which is basically, imagine going to a family reunion where you have 10,000 aunts and uncles trying to influence what you say at dinner.
Yeah.
You know.
I do.
You do. And this is why they call us neurotic.
That's right, exactly.
Because these are all these neurons interacting with each other. So it's a spider web-like set of connections. And the simple rules are neurons which fire together wire together, which is a Canadian's paraphrase of it's Donald Hebb's statement that's been paraphrased. Neurons which fire together wire together. So basically, experience is the firing of neurons, and neurons strengthen their connections with each other when they fire. So we know that about the brain.
So you knew that, and when you say it was a decade of the brain, we knew more about the brain because we were starting to have images of the brain that
That's
we
right.
could see.
Underneath the skull, you can now peer with PET scans and
Yes.
ultimately functional MRIs.
So you knew that, and all these people sitting around knew that
was
and
fine.
felt great about that.
Felt great.
Yeah, we know the brain.
Now,
Yeah.
mind.
Mm-hmm.
No one
Wow.
could say anything. It was quite amazing. And so a neuroscientist would say, the mind is just the activity of the brain. And the anthropologist would get very upset by that and say, no, it's not. A mind is what happens in culture and is transmitted across generations. And the group had a lot of tension, and no one could agree on anything. And we ended that night, and I thought that the group is over. So that week, I went for a long walk with myself, and I thought, since I knew all these people, I'd invited everybody to the party, I thought there ought to be a way to allow an anthropologist to speak to a neuroscientist and everyone in between. So I was walking, and I thought, okay, what does the mind of an anthropologist and the mind of a neuroscientist, what do they share in common? So I came up with a definition which basically takes the science of systems and says, you know, if an anthropologist, let's say she's studying culture, what is she really studying? She's studying the way people communicate with each other. That's passed across generations. And what's communication? Communication is the way we share energy and information flow between and among us. And then when you think about the fundamental way the nervous system functions, it's energy and information flow. It's the same thing. So once you look at the level of energy, realizing that energy, a physicist would say, is the potential to do stuff. Sometimes work, sometimes not, but a potential to do stuff. That's all they can say about it. And information is sometimes can be seen as a swirl of energy, this symbolic value. Then you say, okay, so there's a movement across time. You use the word flow. There's a movement across time of energy, information, fine. And when you look at systems, like let's say a culture of systems of people, or a system like the nervous system, or a family, and I was trained as a family researcher, so to me it was natural to then say, okay, if you're staying at the level of systems, systems have what's called an emergent property, which is something that arises from the interaction of the elements of the system, and it's called self-organizing. That is, you don't have to have a programmer. It's just the interactions of the elements of the system. Let's say like a classroom. You know, a classroom can have an upbeat quality to it, and energy and optimism, or it can have the opposite of that. It doesn't come from any one person. It's the interaction of the teacher with students, etc. So from a systems point of view, I said to this group, if you define one aspect of the mind, not the whole of the mind, because of course the mind has subjective experience and consciousness and thoughts and feelings, beliefs, attitudes, behaviors, all that stuff, fine, that's mental activity. But a core aspect of the mind is a relational and embodied process. So it's not just in the skull, it's relational and it's embodied. That's the system you're looking at, is energy and information flow patterns that are both relational and embodied, and it is basically, the long way of saying it's an emergent self-organizing process, but you can just drop emergent self-organizing, but that just scientifically defines it, just call it a process. So a process that regulates the flow of energy and information. So relationships would be the sharing, the nervous system, let's just call that the brain, would be the mechanism, the embodied mechanism, and the mind is an emergent process that self-organizes energy and information flow in a way that basically regulates that flow. And then what you could do as a person running this group is have the group go on, which it did for 4.5 years. And all the scientists, amazingly, there was 100% agreement. And you know, whenever you get academics to agree on anything like that, you should just quit your career.
So how
call it a day. You know, but we.
I'm glad you didn't.
We went on to do it, and that changes everything. Once you have that definition of regulate, like when you regulate, do you drive a car? You do?
Yes,
okay.
I do.
So when you regulate a car, how do you regulate it?
I steer it.
You steer it?
I push the gas.
Okay.
I push the brakes.
So you change its direction, its speed, whether it's going or not. So that's modifying something, the car. And what if we put you in the car and blindfolded you?
I would put on the brakes.
You put on the brakes, but you wouldn't be able to regulate it too
No,
much.
I wouldn't be able to regulate it, right.
So you got to be able to monitor and modify. So anything that's regulatory monitors and modifies. So in schools, or let's say in therapy or in families, you can teach people how to have themselves or others have a stronger mind. If you can monitor energy and information flow in your body and in your connection with others with more stability, just like a camera. If I had a camera like this and it wasn't stable, what would the video look like?
It would be rocky.
It'd be rocky. And how much detail could you see?
Not too much. Fuzzy.
It'd be fuzzy. Fuzzy in, fuzzy out, right? So you can teach people to stabilize a lens, the Mindsight lens, to see this. And then you can teach them to modify toward health, which we can get to next. But so that was the definition I offered to them. And the thing about it that's amazing is once you do that, you can show correlations between anthropological findings and neuroscience findings. And you can go into sociology, and you can study medicine. I'll give you an example in medicine. There's a study in medicine where you took physicians and you had one interaction with patients who had a common cold act with empathy, using Mindsight basically to see the other person. So if you had a common cold, I'll show you what that looked like. You have a common cold, you come.
Oh, I feel gross.
Oh, Maria, this is so hard because I know you had a big thing coming up to work, and this must be really hard for you. You know, what I'd like you to do is just drink a lot of fluids, see if you can rest at home, get some extra sleep, don't exercise for a day or two, and you'll be getting better soon.
As opposed to?
As opposed to,
oh, I feel gross.
you know, just don't exercise and, you know, just sleep a little more.
So the impact on me, you're saying?
The studies have shown your immune system will improve if you're in an empathic connection with somebody, and you'll get over your cold a day sooner with just a 10-minute or 15-minute visit with a physician who's empathic. So the question is, what is empathy? What is compassion?
What is that? What is the power of that connection? What's happening when that happens? What's happening? Why would I improve more quickly?
I can give you my view.
Yeah.
You know, my view is that there is a fundamental process where when two people feel felt by each other, the system that's created is called integrated. We honor each other's differences, but then we become linked. So that's called integration. So what we say in this work I do is we say we can define the mind, and we can actually define a healthy mind, which is a system, whether it's a culture or a classroom or a family or a one-to-one relationship or even a relationship with yourself that we call mindfulness. Those are all examples of integrative functioning.
And you don't have to connect and integrate in a very intimate and long way by the sounds of things. That
No.
doctor merely walking into the room and saying those words would have an effect on my system.
That's right. That's what the studies show. I'm not making that up. I mean, that's a research study that shows that. And you can go, let's say, in my field of attachment research, you can basically go and study a parent-child relationship. So you want to be my mom or you want to be my daughter?
I'll be your mom.
Okay. So if you're my mom, a way our relationship would not be integrated, integration always requires the differentiation of two entities and their linkage. Right? So you're my mom, and let's do a non-integrated relationship. So you could basically ignore me totally. So I'm totally differentiated.
No, I'd rather fuse you.
Okay, all right. So, all right.
That's more familiar to me.
That's more familiar. Okay, so well, the one case.
How could you do that? Do you know how much I've done for you in my life? And there you are. You go out. You don't tell me what time you're coming home, and I worry all the years.
There you go.
Sorry. Okay.
Perfect. Want to say more about that? Exactly. So that would be what? Too much differentiation?
That would be too much
linkage.
fusion.
Yeah,
too much you
not
are
enough
me, I am
differentiation.
you. There's no differentiation.
No differentiation. So you don't have integration there. You can look at any relationship, put the lens of integration on it, and you can see relationships that thrive, not like that one, or not like the one where people are too differentiated. So it's really honoring and really thriving on differences, nurturing differences, but then promoting compassionate connections with people.
But my motivation here is if you're telling me that if I were more integrated with you as your mother, and that would to be that I was more healthy in that relationship,
The
and
balance
telling
of
you how I
linkage
felt as
differentiation.
opposed to trying to make you feel guilty, for example.
Exactly.
That would somehow improve the health and the well-being of
Oh, it
my
would.
child and
Absolutely.
me.
Absolutely. You can just look at attachment research and show that's absolutely true. There's science to show. Now,
So it affects the brain?
Yeah, they don't use the concept of integration. So I'm basically, what I try to do is I try to find universal principles across many different scientific disciplines. So let's take integration from an attachment point of view.
Okay.
I'm an attachment researcher. I can reinterpret all of the findings of attachment research to the simple statement, communication that's integrative promotes health, period.
Yeah.
And you can just basically predict the outcome for almost any attachment study. And it holds true.
So how do we learn to be that person who can have mindsight and have relationships and interactions that are integrative rather than destructive? How do we learn that?
Yeah, this is exactly the issue, because that's where mindsight comes in. So in the case of the two fused people, there's no mindsight there. You're seeing that my experience is just through you, exactly. And the other one is where there's no mindset, there's no even effort to see it. So the reason mindsight promotes integration and the way you cultivate mindsight is actually allowing people to experience an inner kind of sense of themselves, which we can talk about how to do that. We call that time in, where you actually you have this time in to really sense energy and information flow in your own body and promote integration there, and there's ways of doing that. And then there's time between, where you really can see how it is. Can I really put myself in your perspective? Can I really imagine what it's like to sit there and be you and then be communicating with me? And when you do that, literally, there are three kinds of what are called mindsight maps that you can have people develop. One is a mindsight map of me. So I want to know, where have I been in the past? Where am I right now? Where am I going in the future? So another Canadian, Endel Tolving, calls that mental time travel, where you link past, present, and future.
That's the me map.
That's a me map. Then there's a you map, where I've literally, and I can show you where it is in the brain too. You make these maps of another person's mental experience called empathy. So it's different from compassion, where you're kind of feeling with a person, but you make a mindset map of you, very important. But then there's a third kind of mindset map, which I think is the key to our future as a species. It's a mindset map of we. And it's the basis of morality. And you realize that, I am more than me. I'm connected to you, but I'm really a part of we. And that way you're really embracing all three kinds of maps, that if they're absent from a person's life, then all you say is, well, I may as well acquire a lot of stuff, I may as well do this, do that, and you act like my professors did in medical school, where you say, sorry, you have a diagnosis of cancer, next patient. Because you don't have a map inside your own map-making ability that realizes that another person has a subjective experience, which is profoundly important.
So, we are all then wondering how does a parent, for example, because that's your primary place of learning things. Initially, that's where you start, and you're the attachment expert. So, what kinds of things might a parent do to encourage that kind of mindsight,
Sure.
and what might they do to discourage it?
Okay, so let's look at the science first, and then we'll talk about the practical aspects. The science tells us that secure attachments, which are basically relationships that are integrated, the parents have mindsight. They're able to look at themselves and know where they were in their past, how their past has influenced them, where they are in the present, and where they'd like to go in the future. And in a book I wrote with my daughter's preschool director, Parenting from the Inside Out, we actually teach parents how to develop mindsight. That whole book is about that. So starting from one's own inner life as a parent, then that's one of the most important things.
So
one
be
can do.
the person.
So be the person you want to see in the world,
Yeah.
like Gandhi
Yes.
said, right?
Yes.
So that's the first thing. When you look at studies of kids, you can say, well, what's the secret in the sauce? What actually is a kid experiencing? And if you look at the studies of deaf children, there's a really powerful finding. Deaf children who are born to deaf parents turn out to have normal mindsight abilities. Deaf children born to hearing parents have an almost virtual absence of mindsight abilities, and they look like they're autistic. And autism is a lack of cultivation of this mindsight ability, to see that you have a mind, but you don't have a sense of one's own mind or other people's minds.
So deaf children who were born to hearing parents who don't do sign language?
Exactly.
Okay.
That's exactly,
Okay.
you got it. Go ahead. So tell me why you came up with that great intuition.
Because when I was in university, I worked with deaf children, and I observed that if the parents, I spoke to children who were 12 years old and had never had a conversation with their parents because the parents were hearing. They were deaf, and the parents had chosen that the children didn't do sign language at home. They wanted them to learn to speak. And I remember being dumbfounded that you could be 12 years old and never have had a conversation with your parents. So now
Exactly.
you're helping me understand what happens.
There you go,
then.
exactly. Whereas if you had a parent who signed,
It's fluent.
it's fluent, and so let's say you're my child, and you're deaf, and I'm deaf, and you fall down. What am I going to sign to you? What am I going to communicate with you in energy and information flow to you?
Just what any mother or father would.
Which would be what? Let's hear.
Well, if it were me, I'd say, "You're okay, get up, buck up." But I'm not the best mother. But I get your picture.
We actually have an interview. Your son is here.
Yeah, so
You
you
have a
would
guest.
say, "Oh, are you okay?" Yeah, like that. But if you don't have the language,
Yeah. So if you don't have, so other parents might say, "Oh, that must have been scary for you," or "That was really a shock that you didn't know that tricycle was there," or whatever. You must feel, sad, or must hurt, or you'd use what's called mentalese, language that embedded in the structure of the words, the mental experience. You're sad, you're frightened.
but this is a key point that you're pointing out here. I don't think all parents know that this is a good response.
That's right.
They're reflecting back what you're thinking they might be feeling. And
Right.
so you're doing two things there. You're helping them understand better what they might be feeling.
Totally.
as
Well, that's why it goes hand in hand. You see. So when a parent has mindsight, they say, "Whoa, my child just fell. She's really upset. You must be really upset. That must have been frightening." So when a child has that day after day after day, just as a natural part of the world, not that something super special. I'm going to give you a lecture on mindsight now, young lady. It's not like that. It's a part of the weaving together. You can see families where that's absent.
Yes.
I mean, I talk about a case in the book called Mindsight that I wrote of Stuart, who was 92 when I started working with him, and he never had that as a kid. And his wife, who knew his parents when they were still alive, she said they were the coldest people on the planet, and he didn't have this skill. But I think it's an innate capacity for every human being, for the most part, unless there's some serious neurological impairment, but for the most part, certain attachment categories, and this is about 20% or 25% of the non-clinical population actually has this deficit to various degrees. Stewart's was pretty intense because both parents were this way. But basically, if you're raised... See, here's the thing to realize. There's a way of seeing the physical aspect of things. Bless you. And there's a way of seeing the mental aspect of things. Right? So these two things. Yeah. So if you're raised in a world where everything is just the physical aspect of things, you become a professor of medicine, and then when you diagnose somebody, you say, you have cancer, sorry, bye, next one. You know, like that. Because you literally have been reinforced over and over in your family, perhaps, in your school, in your graduate school, to just deal with the physical.
And does that mean that a part of your brain isn't actually developing as well?
Yes. I had a professor of medicine actually say to me once, it's a sad story, but you know, one of my long-term patients when I was taking care of in internal medicine was really, really sick, and then one day he died, and I left rounds, in the middle of rounds, to be with my resident. I was a medical student, and we stood by his body, and we both were crying. We were taking care of him a long time, and he told us all the stories of his life, and you know, this was the end, and you know, we were very close, the three of us really. And so that afternoon, there was already a scheduled meeting I had with the attending professor, and he says, Daniel, he goes, you know, you're doing a good job, but what happened this morning? I said, what do you mean what happened? He goes, you left teaching rounds. I said, I know Mr. Smith, you know, passed away, and I went with my resident to just spend some time with him. He goes, there's no time for tears. And he goes, you need to get over these feelings like this. That was his lesson to me, get over it, you know. And so what kind of human being does that? Well, a human being who's really smart, who's really good at memorizing physical things, who's missing some circuitry gears.
It's almost like a disability.
I might take away the almost. Yeah, you know. So now the thing is, it looks, you know, so when you put it's fine if he's like doing something he doesn't need that, but to be teaching the next generation of physicians that's the socialization process, and you probably know, even recent studies show that in medical school, kids start out with a lot of empathy, and by the end it's beaten out of them. And this is why. Because we were not given any tools to keep our minds healthy.
Yes, and safe.
And safe.
From all the pain that
from all the pain that you were going to feel, and all the feeling of helplessness and vulnerability. No one was teaching us. In fact, they were teaching us just the opposite.
And you're saying that if we knew more about how to help people have mindsight, that we would be able to be in the face of pain, to watch other people suffer, and not to just go away somewhere.
Well, let me build.
Just shut down.
Exactly. Let's build.
So Stuart. I want you to tell us about Stuart too, because he holds the hope for us here too. It's never too late.
Never too late. It's never too late but let's stay with the young students.
Yeah.
Even here's the thing. If you let's say we're going to take on this definition. The mind is a process that regulates the flow of energy information. It's embodied and relational. So if you say to someone, "Where is the mind?" Well, where is it, Dan? Where's the mind? The mind is in your body and it's in your relationships. It's not nowhere. It's not a mystery. It's not a placeholder for the unknown. The mind is in your body and in your relationships. And in your cell phones. That's why, like in LA, you know, it's so funny for me. You know, they have the big signs on the freeway that says, "Don't text while you drive." You know, and I first saw that, I thought, that's crazy. Who would text while you drive? But then you see all these people. In fact, I want to be texting while I'm driving. We're so needing to be connected to each other. Why? Because our minds are created by our relationships. That's why people are so crazy about did you ever notice? You can see, you can go to a restaurant, everyone's like doing their own little digital thing while they're sitting with each other in a restaurant.
So I'm just
in fact, I got to call someone.
Thanks, Angela. That you said your mind is in your body and your relationships.
And your relationships,
so
not just in your head.
So the relationship part, so what's the connection between the mind and the body and relationships then? How do they
so the body is the physical mechanism through which energy and information flows. Relationships are the sharing of energy and information flow, like what's happening between me and you and everybody else. And the mind is the emergent, self-organizing process that's arising from both the body, so it's embodied, and our relationships, including the relationship we have with the planet. But let's just stick with social relationships here. That's arising from that. And, you know, what's so fascinating about this is, first of all, you know, you can have people graduate from prestigious universities in cognitive neuroscience and psychology. And I've seen this happen so much, it's crazy. And I'll say to them, well, how many lectures did you have that define what the mind is? You're a double major in cognitive neuroscience and psychology. None. You just had 4 years in those two majors. None.
Because people don't think of it as a process. I think you
That's
nailed
right.
it. They think of it just as that grade thing that's up there.
The
kind
vague
of,
term.
Not really. It's kind of optional. You don't really need your mind.
Well, it's something.
But what you're saying is it's the thing that tells us our reality in the world, but also connects us to people.
It connects us to people. And this is, the people who study, you know, in various fields often don't talk to each other. So the work I do is called consilience. It's an E.O. Wilson term in a wonderful book, basically where we look for universal principles across disciplines. So the field I do or work in is called interpersonal neurobiology. We have, you know, almost 24 textbooks now that I've edited a bunch of them. And, you know, what we try to do is create a field where all sciences are represented. So that's interpersonal neurobiology. Then what we do is we say, how do we apply this in the real world so that people in education or parenting or mental health or whatever can benefit from the science? So we do those two things, integrate all the sciences and then translate for making the world a better place if we can. So that's what we do. Now in doing that, we say, look, if you define the mind as this process that's embodied, it makes many neuroscientists uncomfortable because they would say, no, the mind is just the activity of the skull part. And you go, no, it's in the whole body. That gets them agitated. Then once you say the mind is relational, for anyone who wants to own their own mind, this really pisses them off. I'm serious. Because, you know, first of all, in relationships you have, do your relationships affect your mind?
Majorly.
Majorly, right. Well, that's because the mind is born from relationship. So if you're a neuroscientist, of course, and some of my dearest friends are neuroscientists, and I really feel for them, they have to, I'm serious, they have to really be limited in what they study or they won't get grants and they won't get publications, and they have to do that. And I was with some recently, and they just said, you know, we have to do that kind of work. I said, of course, that work you do is so important. But someone's got to take a step back from that and say, the mind is not just the activity of the brain, for God's sakes. Just see how you live. The mind is a relational process, and it's an embodied process, both.
And
Yeah.
I was just thinking about some of the research that you're doing and that you talk about, where in fact when people change their mind, change their habits of their mind, in for example, doing things like relaxation or mindfulness activities, that it actually changes the brain. I think that's the part that is, and that matters, that it changes the brain.
So watch this. So if you say, building on exactly what you're saying, if you say, okay, what is this? How is this even important? I mean, it's intellectually maybe it's interesting. 100,000 mental health professionals, blah blah blah. So you say, let's talk about schools for a moment. You say to teachers K through 12, what are you trying to do? We are trying to build a strong mind in our student. Great. What's the mind? No comment. I mean, I was saying at dinner, there's this wonderful book on mind, brain, and education, and amazingly, they left the term mind out of the glossary. Every other word is defined. They left the word out. And I'm going to call up the editor, who's my editor, and I wonder how that happened. That, 20 people probably reviewed that manuscript, and no one caught that the title of the book is Mind, is the starter, and they left it out of the glossary. So there's something going on that's kind of funny. And so here's what you can do in school. And this is what, this summer is what I'm going to be doing in a bunch of conferences I'm teaching at. You say, look, if you say that a teacher, K through 12, has his or her job is to develop a strong mind, but you don't have a definition of mind, and you're just teaching reading, writing, arithmetic, there's something not right there. So what if we actually define the mind, a working definition of one aspect of the mind, as a process that regulates the flow of energy information, that's embodied and relational. You need to teach your students to monitor energy and information flow in their bodies, which you can do, and in their relationships, which you can do, and then modify it toward integration. These are teachable skills. So, for the longest time, I've been looking for a phrase that we can all use, and I tried one that half the people love and half the people hate it, so I've dropped it. It's called brain brushing.
No, you were mental flossing.
And
last
mental
time.
flossing, too. Yeah,
You ran that one by me.
Oh, you didn't like it? So,
You said your kids didn't like
no,
it.
they didn't want to even say it, so I'm glad you said it, because I'm not allowed to say it. But I thought, look, if everyone, for the most part, brushes their teeth, they keep their dental hygiene good, we ought to have some kind of regular practice to strengthen the mind, just like you strengthen your teeth.
What would it be?
So this is the one I've been throwing
Okay.
around, and so far I've gotten really positive response.
Okay, try it out.
You ready? You tell me what you guys think. Time in. Where you take time in, and you then say, look, in schools, you got to take time in to develop literally the parts of the brain that make these Mindsight maps that regulate attention, so you can stabilize attention, that actually balance your emotions, that build compassion and empathy, that allow you to actually know yourself in a deeper kind of way. And, in the United States, we have this policy called No Child Left Behind, which is really a strange term for let's test you like crazy and drive the teachers mad. So what I say, at least in the U.S., I don't know if this will go over in Canada, but I say we need a policy of no prefrontal cortex left behind, because this
I don't see the T-shirt, but I get your idea.
this is the idea that these are where the Mindsight maps are made.
And teachers are doing that. And there are examples of that.
And there are examples, like the Mind Up program is an example, the social emotional intelligence programs are examples. And we need to make this where it's a practice where every student knows they have to take time in every day. Where you do this just like you brush your teeth every day, you take time in. And you can show, there are a bunch of studies now that look at this, and Mind Up is one program from Goldie Hawn. The people in Chicago who do the social emotional intelligence is another example. We do things at the Garrison Institute, another example. When you allow people to basically focus on the mind, and we have this practice called the Wheel of Awareness practice, which kind of does it all in one sitting. You can listen to that from our website. But you can actually have a systematic practice where you strengthen the capacity to at once monitor energy and information flow within yourself and between yourself and others, and move that flow toward integration. Because let me give you an example about taking time in. If I said to you, Maria, let's start with consciousness, being aware. And if you had to kind of think about how would you integrate awareness, starting with that domain, that area of human experience, what are things that could be differentiated within awareness from each other? And then we can talk about how to link them. But what within awareness can you make distinct from within the phenomena, the experience, the subjective experience of being aware, of awareness?
What do you mean? What would I be aware of in myself?
Yeah, well, just the concept of awareness. If you said, let's help students promote integration of consciousness.
How they feel.
How they feel.
Their emotion, their mood, their energy.
So emotions and moods or energy, right? So you could differentiate those from what other things?
I don't know, somebody help me.
They're senses. So you'd have the 5 senses coming from the outside world. And what else? Intuition. And intuition, which often is thought of as the wisdom of the body. Right? So you'd have the outside world through the 5 senses, what's called in science, we call it the 6th sense of the body, intuition. The 7th sense would be just what you said, feelings, thoughts, memories, images, beliefs, attitudes, hopes, dreams, wishes, all that kind of stuff, mental activities. And then there's even an 8th sense you could differentiate, our sense of connection to each other. The 8th sense, a relational sense, which is so underdeveloped in modern culture that we're killing ourselves as a species.
So you're saying that those things are things you need to develop?
Well, many people have them, but what's fascinating about integration as a concept and a process is, let's take integration of awareness as an example. You can take students, and we do this in a couple of schools I work in, where you do this thing called a wheel of awareness, where you have a central hub and an outer rim, and around the rim you have all the things we just mentioned. The 5 senses that bring in the outside world, the sense of the interior of the body, the sense of your mental activities, and even a relational sense. But the other thing you can differentiate besides those from each other, and this is really, really, really powerful, is the hub is the experience of awareness, and the rim represents that which you're aware of. When you teach kids or teenagers or adults to differentiate the experience of knowing, that is awareness, from the known, which is what you're aware of, huge changes happen in people who are prone to anxiety or worry.
What kind of changes?
Well, let's take anxiety for an example. When you can train a person to integrate consciousness, and it doesn't take long, what you do is you allow them to develop this hub of their mind, and they're able to experience what before was an anxiety, let's say a worry, that before they were, in quotes, stuck on the rim, and they were lost in their worry. When they strengthen the hub, they pull back from the rim, they see that this anxiety that's just a point on the rim, it's just a point that's going to come and go. And instead of being imprisoned by the rim, they're liberated in the hub. Now, we're not talking deep science here, but there's a whole, in this book I wrote called The Mindful Therapist, which is like the backup book to the Mindsight book, like the back science story. You can show how awareness, in fact, is an energy pattern. Energy moves by means of degrees of probability. And this is a whole field of science we don't need to get into, but the bottom line is once you say the mind is a process that regulates energy flow, and some energy patterns are information, then you have to look at the science of energy. The simplest thing you can say is that energy can move from 100% certainty, like I say, Eiffel Tower. I just said it, bam. But that's 100% certainty, I just said it. Now, right now, you don't know what I'm going to say. But I might be more likely to say Golden Gate Bridge, or the Trump Tower, or something, the Sears Tower, or the Empire State Building, because I said an architectural feature. So I could have maybe a 50% probability of saying an architectural feature, or I could drop down to 0% probability, where you don't know what I'm going to say.
Frog.
And that's infinite possibility. So here's the deal. Thoughts have a quality of absolute certainty. That is, I'm thinking, oh my God, what am I going to do for dinner? Oh my God, oh my God. So like if I'm stuck on the rim, I'm stuck in the certainty of that. When you give people the power to do what the mind really does, which is shift degrees of probability of energy flow and bring them down to this open space, which we call awareness, you actually strengthen the capacity of the mind to not only see things clearly, but literally to integrate experience so that these various, what I call peaks and plateaus of, a peak would be, Eiffel Tower, a plateau would be, maybe I'll mention an architectural feature. I can drop down to this open plane where anything is possible. Now, I know it sounds kind of wacko, but here's the amazing thing about once you do that. You can try the wheel of awareness yourself, and when you do this, in a very rapid fashion, kids, teenagers, and adults experience this empowerment of their own mind so that, let's say they're in a relationship with someone and something's really upsetting. The upsetting experience they have, they can hold that within the space of awareness and stay present with it. So instead of getting flooded by it, they actually stay fully there. So this is the way you stay fully present for another person and even fully present for yourself.
And you can learn that.
And you can learn it. It's amazing, but it's very, very learnable.
So I'm feeling selfish keeping you to myself when there's a we, too. So I think this is the point at which I am going to ask the lights to come up just a little bit, because I'm feeling that you probably have questions about some of this and how it applies to your world. And Freitas over here with the bright orange jacket has a microphone. Is getting a microphone. Do we have another microphone too on the other side?
Can I ask a question first before we get going? Did this make any sense? Yeah. Okay, good. Because you can see how crazy it can make you feel. I'm serious. Because after a while you realize, whoa, this is powerful stuff.
But I could feel that there were questions starting to happen.
So I get to go first. So there's lots of questions that spring to mind, but I guess I'll start it off with this idea of the hub. I kept looking for, or listening to hear the word soul and spirit somehow. And is that what the hub is, or is the hub related to spirit or soul in some way?
Yeah, thank you for that question. You know, the journey that I'm on and the role I'm in is to stay like with one foot solidly in science and the other foot solidly in practical applications. Lately, I've been asked to teach at a lot of spirituality conferences and things like that. So this question you're asking always comes up, and I really want to stay clear that I need, since I have so many different roles, that I stay firmly always consistent with science. And in science, we don't talk about the soul and we don't talk about spirituality, but that doesn't mean they don't exist, and that doesn't mean there's not a scientific view of it, for sure. But I just want to explain to you where I'm coming from, because the other half of the time I'm actually sitting with a bunch of scientists trying to ask them to try to broaden the way they think, and so I need to make sure that it's always clean, you know, where I come from. So I once had a patient who had a terrible car accident. It was very, very sad. This is actually the first chapter of Mindsight, where she had this accident. She didn't wear a safety belt, and the car unfortunately damaged this prefrontal area. She lost her Mindsight map-making ability, and she used to have them big time. She was an incredibly attuned, connected, empathic, compassionate, insightful person, and then unfortunately the accident destroyed this part of her brain. And this is what really began my journey. When I took her brain scans to try to help this family, I took them to the library to try to understand what these functions she didn't have now, was there any science behind it? Well, when I was alone with her in the room, and she lost all the things like regulating her body and balancing her emotions and attuning to others, and she couldn't see from her kids' perspectives anymore, and you know, she was no longer acting always with morality and things like that. When I asked her what life was like since the accident, she turned to me and she said, well, I guess if I had to put a word to it, I would say, I've lost my soul. And this essence of who she was why the whole family was really going crazy, because her physical body was still there, but the essence of who she was, not even from a metaphysical point of view. I'd done a lot of work with a dear friend of mine who unfortunately recently passed away, John O'Donohue. And John was a mystic and a philosopher and a Catholic priest. And he and I were writing a book together on this exact subject, about the soul and the scientific view of it and poetry and the brain and all this kind of thing. So I know from these deep discussions with John, you know, that there is a way, in fact, of marrying these two fields. So in terms of your question, when I have taught now to thousands and thousands of people the Wheel of Awareness practice, so like in a group like this, many, many groups like this, if we had time to do it, and you can download it for free from my website and stuff and do it yourself so you can experience it yourself. When people get into this experience of, you send a spoke out from the hub to different parts of the rim, and then you even send a spoke out and turn it around back on the hub itself. So people experience what the hub awareness of awareness is like. What people who are spiritually inclined or talk with words like soul and senses like that say that's their home. That's what they always experience. And I've had people who haven't had a spiritual bone in their body, after they do the Wheel of Awareness practice, they use these words, oh my God, I'm transformed. Now I'm connected to everything. I never had this feeling before. So all I can say from a scientific point of view, and I did a conference recently with Jack Kornfield just a few days ago in New York, where this came up, you know, over and over again in the conference, that when in Buddhist practice, people talk about the infinite or the common consciousness. Here's what I said then, and I'll say it now in terms of your question. When you think that the difference between you and me and Maria and everyone else are peaks, the way it works is you imagine a plane with open possibility where you can move energy to this infinite space, or you can move to a plateau where you're likely to, like, I'm in a mood to have Italian food, or no, I think I'll have Japanese food, or you're in a mood. Or you go to a peak, I'm definitely going for Italian food, right? That's just the way of thinking about it. So you have peaks of certainty, plateaus of probability, and this open plane of possibility. The place we're all different is in our peaks and our plateaus. But the place we all share is in the open plane of possibility. And when you feel that, when you actually experience it first person, and I'm only getting into this kind of depth because you're asking this important question about it, to me, this is one scientific view that helps us tie all the different world's religions together. It helps us tie non-theistic practices like Buddhist practice, and it helps us look deeply from a scientific perspective on why taking time in is so important, so that people literally open up their sense of awareness of we. Because in modern culture, and culture shapes these peaks and these plateaus, in modern culture there's just about me, 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 me. So if we can drop people with time into this open plane, I think the human potential for collaborating, working together, and going beyond where we've gotten ourselves now is huge. And I see this as basically a scientific perspective on what other people would call soul and spirituality. Does that help? Thank you for the question. If you go to Dr. Dan Siegel, I hate that my wife made me use this name. She said, it's a relational thing. We used to call it the Mindsight Institute, which I prefer. But anyway, she said it's about a person and a relationship. So anyway, drdansiegel.com. And somewhere in there, you'll find an audio. I don't know the website, but somewhere you'll find an audio thing for the Wheel of Awareness. And if you want to go all the way to the hub on the hub, do Wheel of Awareness 3. That's more. It's more advanced. Go for it. If you're up for it. You know, the mindful therapist has the plane of possibility. They wouldn't let me put that in the Mindsight book. They said you'll scare the public off. So I feel nervous even telling you guys about it. But there's so many things. So basically, I wrote the Mindsight book. And the moment I was done with that, I quickly wrote the Mindful Therapist book, because there was all this science they would not let me put in the general public book. So if you read them together, you get the whole shebang.
Hi. I'm wondering how you could
Wave your hand so we can.
There we go.
Right
Thank you.
Oh,
Hi.
yeah.
How do you apply this to the developing mind of a child? And, you know, at what stages would you say they're capable of, in their development, to perceive what we're talking about here? Is the first part of my question. And then the second part of my question is, how do you approach a child when they're not quite able to fully, they're developmentally not quite ready to perceive what we're talking about?
Yes. So there's a book that one of my students and I just finished that'll come out October 4th called The Whole Brain Child, which addresses both your questions. And actually we had a lot of fun because we hired a wonderful illustrator. So the book is full of, you know, cartoons and fun things to address your questions. So I'll just say this, that you can see from what Maria and I were talking about, for a parent to take the approach that my job is to teach Mindsight and to teach integration, which is basically what the book is about, those two things. You say, okay, you know, this is the way I teach my child to reflect on what's actually going on and honoring subjective experience, so that's number one. It actually teaches the importance of relationships, so that's number two. These processes that we can teach as parents, research has shown, help your child develop resilience. So these are the new R's of basic education, you know, reflection, relationship, and resilience. And when you see it that way, then you realize you'll have the intuition as a parent on when your child is ready for what degree of knowing this. So we've taught the Wheel of Awareness, for example, to kids as young as 5. And they really get it. For them, and we have a school in New York where we're teaching this to kids that age too. And you know, what kids do is they get this visual metaphor where they're able to say, you know something, I've got a rim point that's really bothering me. Let me wait a minute till it goes away, you know, or let me get to the hub, or the teachers in the school can say, you know, I got lost on the rim, I got to get back to the hub, let me take some time in, you know, and hold on a second. So you get this shared vocabulary for kids as young as, you know, in kindergarten. So in Seattle, some people were using these techniques, and once I was giving a talk to the Seattle public schools, and one of the kindergarten teachers actually brought up a drawing that one of the young kids did. I think she was at the end of kindergarten, and she showed me this drawing. It was unbelievable. Where, you know, we do this thing where you teach kids about the way their brain and their mind interact. So we have this hand model. So this would be if you put your thumb in the middle, put your fingers over the top. This is basically how the brain would be inside your skull. So what we teach kids is, and we have this in the Whole Brain Child book, you have your cortex on the top where you do your thinking. You have your lower brain, or your downstairs brain, limbic area, the brain stem. The downstairs brain is what we call it, where you have all these important feelings and bodily sensations. And basically, sometimes you can flip your lid, you know? Literally, where you lose all these functions that we know are from these cortical areas, the frontal, especially prefrontal areas. So you teach kids about flipping your lid. So what this teacher brought up to me, we're in the middle of my talk, it was really amazing, and it was actually being televised. She says, here, I got to show you what one of the kids who did your thing. That you can teach kids that age about the brain. Because the mind uses the brain to create itself, you know? And so you say, look, if you flipped your lid, you can't integrate your downstairs brain and your upstairs brain, and so you're going to be screaming and yelling. So take some time in, go bring your brain back together, integrate your brain, and then come back when you're ready. And I swear, this is what the kid said. She said, I need to take time out so I can take time, she didn't use time in there, I take time to get my brain back together. You know, and the teacher said, good, go there and take care of yourself. So the ability to articulate this is basically what Mindsight is. If you say, whoa, I think I'm about to flip my lid, that's Mindsight. That's all the difference between just flipping your lid, right? So
there's a question, though. If you flip your lid,
yeah.
And there are a lot of people in their life who flipped their lids, including people who became surgeons, and when their lid was flipped, they did something to deal with that raw emotion that didn't help them become integrated again.
That's right.
So it's just not about covering it up again.
No, this is not covering, this is integrating. But you're,
but that's a tricky business, this part. Teaching children to do that is probably...
So you ask some basic questions, you know. What were the triggers that got your lid to flip? What were the feelings that were going on? What did it mean to you? Simple questions like that.
So it's just that conversation to bring them back to,
Yeah, and here's the thing we want to do. You really want to realize that we're all in this together. You know, the first time we taught this, when we wrote Parenting from the Inside Out, Mary Hartzell and I, you know, we were teaching this to parents in the school. And my daughter was in preschool there at the same time. And, you know, this mom comes to me the next day. She goes, you know, that lecture you gave on flipping your lid last night? I said, yeah. She goes, you don't understand what that's done to me. I said, oh my God, what's it done to you? She goes, my child's 4 now. And for 3 of those 4 years, I was flipping my lid, but I thought that I was acting really just irrationally, and I thought someone would put me in jail if they found out what I was doing. So I just acted like it didn't happen.
Yes.
And I thought, oh, she's too young to remember, right? But what you told me last night was, it's not my fault, but it is my responsibility. So instead of beating up on herself, she could have self-compassion because she could understand the brain mechanism that was making her lose her mind, really. And then she could go back and make a repair, not only with herself, but especially with her child. Because repair. If Maria and I just said the rest of the night, it wouldn't be enough.
Yes.
We can always make a repair. But she thought she just had to ignore it. This is kind of what you're saying.
Yeah.
And you really want to make this reconnection, and things work out beautifully if you make sense of what happened. That's the basic
True, and you
idea.
know that word repair, this is a personal story. When I first read, I guess it was Mindsight, I think maybe it was Parenting from the Inside Out, that word repair is a real relief for a parent. It's relief for anybody in any relationship.
Yeah.
So I found myself after that, when I was flipping my lid, I would actually say to myself, yeah, this is going to need some repair. But I trusted that repair was possible, which is the gift that you give.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the first time I learned this, was I was done with my child psychiatry training. I was getting board certified as a child psychiatrist. I had gotten a National Institute of Mental Health research grant to study attachment. We had a 6-month-old at home. And I was flipping my lid when he wouldn't calm down. And I was going, God, you are really screwed up. I would say to myself. No. I would say to myself. I would say, something's really wrong with you. And it's a long story, but I'll just give the quick end of it. When I made up a story in my head, my mother must have ignored me when I was a baby, and therefore my son crying is a similar memory, and so it's driving me nuts. Didn't do anything to change anything. And then one day I kind of had a sort of a mini flashback of stabbing a child. It was horrible. So I kind of went running down through this parking lot. It was like so freaky, but the image was still there in my head, And I realized that when I had been a pediatric intern, we had been with kids who were incredibly sick. We were at a tertiary care hospital, and they were sick, and they were dying, and our job was to wake up night after night after night, in the middle of the night when the kid would have a fever, get a sterile blood sample from wherever we could get it, and make sure that we could keep that child alive. That was our job, was to save their life by stabbing them. Well, they would often die anyway. Now, no one taught us, as young physicians, how to stay present with our emotions, like Maria is saying you have to do. So what do you do when you have to do this to save people's lives, and a child is crying and screaming, and you have to ignore their tears and get the blood sample? You do something called dissociate. You basically fragment the way your brain encodes memory, basically. I learned this later on in my own studies, but what happens is it gets embedded in a part of the brain called implicit memory that can come back at you like a flashback, like when my son would cry. I didn't realize I had post-traumatic stress from being a pediatric intern. And that helped about 50% of the way, to get better. But it wasn't repaired. And I said, there's something else here. And then I realized after talking to my pediatric colleagues and really doing some really soul-searching, and I feel terrible saying this, but we basically had no way to tolerate our own feelings of helplessness and vulnerability. And so because we couldn't tolerate those feelings in ourselves, we were angry and intolerant of the people who we were working with. There's a lot of nods in the room, so of the patients, those young children, and their families, who are the most vulnerable. So our inability to stay present with something like just vulnerability of being a human being and being helpless was projected out as anger toward them. And once I realized that and could just own the shame that I, as a young physician, had been angry at my own patients for their helplessness, then I was able to stay present with my son until he became a teenager. And then I had to do a whole nother level of work. It's never over. You don't just integrate and then you're done. It's always a process. And I hope it's okay sharing such a personal story.
Yes, that's beautiful. I'm using a lot of your articles in my PhD, so I really appreciate this stuff. And,
good. I'm glad they're helpful.
And the question I have, I have 15 questions, but I'll just I'll have two. One is regarding states of consciousness, because when you talk about relationship and how relationship affects who we are, basically, from moment to moment, it smells like dependent horizon and the fluctuation of states of consciousness. Mm-hmm. So what's interesting for me, talking to somebody like you, the transpersonal states of consciousness, the higher states of consciousness, can you actually see them in the brain? Is there a place in the brain that flashes, or your research, is there anything that you go there? That's question number one. And then the question number two, the knower as the known, the point in which the knower that you identify yourself with as thought becomes the known.
Yes.
Transcending that. What happens in the brain? Is there a perception, and then the Mindsight or awareness actually intervenes before the emotional connection to the perception? Just to kind of sequence that happens in the brain.
Yeah.
I would love to hear that.
No, those are great questions. I don't know if I have answers. I just have more questions about those great questions. So I'll try. First of all, I'm someone who synthesizes the empirical research of other really hard-working researchers. So I'm a synthesizer of their research. So it's like trying to make a picture of the whole elephant from all the different people who study different parts of the elephant. So that's kind of what my role apparently in the science world is, to do that. So in terms of doing that, there are people who do actual EEG studies, for example, or fMRI studies of people who are meditating, Newberger, what's his, at Pennsylvania, what's his first name? Jeff, having a naming moment here. But anyway, he did studies of nuns and Buddhist monks. At the moment they reach some peak sense of just what you're describing, of feeling this transpersonal sense of connectedness, I believe it was the parietal lobe that maps out the boundaries of the body was shut down. So his theory is, I wish I could remember his name. Does anyone remember his name? Anyway, his theory from University of Pennsylvania is that sense of transpersonal connectedness comes from shutting down the brain area that represents the body. So that's his work. You should look at that. Other people don't like that interpretation, and like I said, in science, you can say up and 20 people say down and get mad at you for saying up, and then you say down and 20 people get mad at you for saying down. So there's always disagreements, but that's one view. Another view is to look at the study from Lutz, Antoine Lutz et al. In looking at what's called objectless compassion, and this was in the 2004 Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, the Lutz paper, and there what you found was in Buddhist monks who were doing this particular Tibetan kind of that is an objectless compassion, they had more gamma waves on the EEG than had ever been seen anywhere. Now, gamma is an EEG signature of neural synchrony, which is basically a signature of integration. So they had huge amounts of integration in gamma wave form at that moment. From my own subjective experience of teaching the Wheel of Awareness practice, where all people who've never meditated before in their lives, who never would mention the word spiritual ever, who come for a mental health talk and they don't know what they're about to get, but all of you can come to Victoria. I'll be doing the 2-day one there tomorrow. We do the Wheel of Awareness practice, and all the people who never were spiritually oriented, who when they get to the hub, on the hub part, they start saying things like, and now I've gotten all these inputs from people, I feel like I'm at one with everyone. I feel like I've come home. I feel unbelievable love. I feel this deep sense of connection. I've never had this, oh my God, what did you do to me? This kind of thing, and so because the pattern all around the planet, because I've done this in lots of different countries, has been virtually identical, I mean obviously with variations, but all with the same kind of theme, with people who weren't oriented this way at all, it just makes me feel like, and I can tell you from my own personal subjective experience, I know this is going to sound weird, but when you really get into this practice a little bit, you realize that each of us are literally just nodes that are manifestations of the exact same essence. So when I'm walking and I see someone, I don't actually feel like I'm seeing someone else. I'm seeing me, I'm seeing just a manifestation of what I'm a manifestation of. I don't actually see this body as, I just see it as a temporary manifestation of energy and information flow patterns that we're all sharing. And if we all do this right, then 200 years from now, when these bodies are not here, but we've shaped culture in a positive direction towards compassion and kindness, which are the outcomes of basically kindness as integration made visible, we will see that 200 years from now, people will experience a way of having a kinder world because of everything these bodies have done. And I see that, I don't know what you call that, but that's kind of what you're talking about. And so then the knower and the known becomes, in a way they become the same thing. But on the other hand, they aren't the same thing, because differentiating them allows you then to link them. So they're never really the same, but it's always this tension of back and forth. Like some of my students who are more kind of straight line, who don't like me talking like this, they say, stop emphasizing the we and what's wrong with me. And I say, look, there's absolutely nothing wrong with me. In fact, integration requires a differentiation of me from you, but then the linkage is in a we. So I am in no way saying don't have a lot of fun, don't make beautiful, wonderful love, don't eat good food, enjoy the sunset, go really enjoy life and embrace the beauty of being alive, but also realize we're all a part of this interconnected whole. Whatever race we're from, or economic background, or political thing, or, and we have to embrace that, because if you just look like what we're doing to the planet in terms of climate change issues, or terrorism, or all the issues, you're going to just list them, we have to have a transformation of culture that makes mindsight maps of we as prevalent as mindsight maps of me have been in their dominant phase in the last period of culture.
So I see a few more hands up, and we only have a few minutes left. So if people can tolerate a shorter answer from Dan, I think we'll take one. No,
You're gonna
this
have
is
to help
not
me
me
with that.
saying. No, this is not me saying I want you to be shorter, but we have to be shorter.
Oh, okay.
So I don't know. Fraser is keeping track of who's next. So we have time for one more question, and where are you?
I work in the mental health field, and
Great.
talking about addictions. I was wondering what some of your thoughts and beliefs about that were. April 1st in BC, alcoholism was recognized by the BC Medical Association as a chronic illness. So just some thoughts about that.
Yeah, no, it's a great question.
Fault, but it's my responsibility.
Yes.
Is this a character flaw or?
Yeah, so for substance abuse and addiction, it's a huge topic, and clearly there are people doing deep research about it. So there may be genetic vulnerabilities to it. Peter Fonig in England showed there's vulnerabilities that seem to be associated with having really painful histories. So there may be genetic components, there may be experiential components. So it's a multifactorial thing. One thing we can say in terms of intervention, the work of Alan Marlott, who unfortunately recently just passed away, really shows that mindfulness processes are incredibly important for preventing relapse. Now you can say, well, why would that be the case? Well, if you look at some of the studies of mindfulness out of Richie Davidson's lab, working with the fantastic work of John Kabat-Zinn with mindfulness-based stress reduction, you can show a couple of things that really get to the heart of your question. In the brain, you have this, just to go back to the whole brain child, upstairs and downstairs brain, you've got all this feeling stuff coming up from the body and coming up to the brainstem and the limbic areas. Now, if that feeling stuff is way too much for the cortex to, quote, handle, so like Maria's saying, what's the proper way to deal with it? So you just get rid of it, or you can't stay present, or whatever. You're leading to this incredible difficulty with what's called self-regulation. So whether it's from a genetic vulnerability, like bipolar disorder, or people with attention deficit are vulnerable to drug misuse because there's a problem with self-regulation, or experiential things like abuse. So those are two totally different pathways, but you might get to a similar problem. So if I'm sitting, just to use it just metaphorically, if I'm sitting in my cortex in awareness and I'm flooded with these feelings I can't deal with, what do? Well, I can distract myself, I can scream and yell, but if I find actually a chemical that numbs me, that gives me a chemical form of dissociation, I realize that feels better than the state of being unable to cope with all this downstairs brain stuff. So in many ways, when you look at the studies of mindfulness, here's what they show. that even after 8 weeks of mindfulness practice, the Hosel study from 2011 shows you see structural changes in the regulatory areas of the brain. That's number one. 8 weeks. 8 weeks of, bless you, 8 weeks of mindfulness practice, already structural changes. Number two, those areas of the brain that are changed even longer than 8 weeks are associated with the capacity to focus attention more. In a study we did, another center I run is called the Mindful Awareness Research Center, and we did a pilot study that shows we can get better attentional changes with mindfulness meditation than you get with medication, right? So you can regulate attention, you can balance emotions. This area of the brain, this upstairs area called the prefrontal region, actually sends inhibitory fibers down to the lower areas to calm them down. So just to put it really simply, if genetically or experientially you don't have enough of those inhibitory fibers, you're constantly being bombarded and flipping your lid and you don't like it, so you drink or you use drugs or whatever. If you can grow those fibers down, you're going to help regulate yourself more. So this is when we say emotion regulation, literally this is what allows you, I know I'm giving you a long answer, but I know. Let me just finish this up. So you get emotion regulation. And so we're doing a study, David Milkovitz is doing a study at UCLA taking women who have bipolar disorder, where the studies out of Yale show this is genetically, you don't have enough inhibitory fibers from your prefrontal region to your amygdala. If you're pregnant, you can't take lithium or other medications. So what we're doing is we're doing mindfulness meditation with women who want to get pregnant and seeing if they can actually grow those fibers to regulate. And I have the story of Jonathan in the Mindsight book is just one case example of doing that, or at least that's what we think happened. So regulating emotions is another thing. Being able to stay present with things that are difficult. What Richie Davidson beautifully showed was you get something called the left shift, which basically means instead of withdrawing from things that are difficult, you stay present. So even if we just stop there and your immune function improves, your physiology improves, empathy improves, all this stuff improves. A study done out of UC Davis where the lead author was Jacobs and the second author was Eppel and one of the other authors was Elizabeth Blackburn, who got the Nobel Prize for discovering telomeres. We now know that mindfulness meditation can change the enzyme called telomerase that maintains the ends of your chromosomes so that your cells will stay alive. Mindfulness meditation looks like increases the enzyme that will allow you to live longer. That's a study from Jacobs et al. In 2010. So in all these ways, those are all regulatory. So the simplest way of summarizing it is mindfulness, I believe, is a way of becoming attuned to yourself, just like a relationship with another person is empathic, and that's interpersonal integration because it's interpersonal attunement. I think mindfulness is a form of internal attunement that promotes a witnessing or observing self to be literally honoring the differences of the experiencing self, not shoulding on it, saying you should do this, you should do that, but rather loving the self and being open to it. And I think this is basically mindfulness creates an internal state of integration which alters the function of the regulatory structures in the brain, grows them, and that's what studies are showing over and over and over again at Harvard, at UCLA. These are the regulatory structures in the brain that are growing, and as they grow, they get stronger, and this is why I think Alan Marlott did that fantastic work to show if you can teach mindfulness to people who have problems with self-regulation and found drugs to regulate themselves, they now have altered the way their brains can regulate the self so that they can lead a life that's freer from that kind of constraint. Does that make sense? Thank you.
Thank you for all of your questions. I'd like to invite Lynn Green to have the final word tonight. Lynn is the CEO of the Dalai Lama Center.
Well, I have the sense that we could stay here all night. And we've heard Daniel actually speak faster and faster in order to be able to answer the questions.
I'm listening to Maria, she's my boss.
And Maria's not being the Wicked Witch. In fact, Dan made time to come here tonight, having scheduled time in Victoria to be a keynote and feature person at a conference at Victoria, and he changed his schedule in order to be with us tonight. And so he has a plane to catch at 10 after 10 tonight, so that's why Maria has been moving this along. But Dan, you are truly a friend of the Dalai Lama Center, and I want to express all of our gratitude for your generosity in being with us tonight. It's been an incredible evening. You said partway through the evening, we're all in this together. And I think you really created that sense amongst us all. We've sure learned a lot, and you've made that learning really accessible to us. And also just raised lots of questions and curiosity. And I think we'll be looking at the website and buying books and reading and learning a lot
there's
more.
one thing I'll just say in terms of the conversation. We actually have a global conversation. I invite you all to come join us. We have an online program where literally have people in 6 continents who are continually, every week, like I was just teaching today, Tuesdays is our teaching day, and we have this global conversation about these issues ongoing. So this can be a beginning, and you all are welcome to come join us in the conversation all around, literally around the planet.
drdansiegel.com.
Yes.
See, good thing you're
And just in case you don't have enough to read, I'd like to leave you with some gifts from the Dalai Lama Center. They're transcripts of dialogues that took place during the Vancouver Peace Summit
Oh,
with the
fantastic.
Dalai Lama, and we'd like to present those to you as our thank you, and on behalf of everyone to say thank you so much for
Great,
listening.
thank you.
And also, just before everyone leaves, I'd like to also thank
Thank you so much.
Maria LaRose for her wonderful moderating time. Thank you, Maria.